Welcome to our podcast, DEF, as a major aid in worldwide pollution control, where we talk to DEF producers, suppliers, and distributors about the role of DEF in a changing world, one with many climate change and pollution concerns. We're sitting down with Barbara Reniker-Evans, president at Contact International, which has been working with the DEF business since it began. Welcome, Barbara. Thanks for sharing your time and knowledge about the DEF industry.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with what exactly is DEF for those who might not be familiar with the term.
DEF, or as we call it, DEF, is a mixture of 32.5% synthetic, high-purity automotive-grade urea and 67.5% deionized water. It's a clear, non-toxic, non-flammable, and non-explosive substance, and generally, it's non-hazardous. The DEF that is in use today weighs about 9 pounds per gallon.
Why, then, is DEF important for pollution control?
DEF is a major element of pollution control here in the United States as well as around the world. DEF is sprayed into the exhaust systems of diesel engines to reduce their harmful emissions by changing those emissions into harmless nitrogen and water before the emissions are issued into the air.
Okay, when did DEF start being used in the US?
A strong DEF market was created in the United States around 2008, but to step back, in 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act, which was to address the growing environmental concerns and demands for cleaner air that Americans were making. Thereafter, the Environmental Protection Agency was created, and the EPA, as it's known, began to implement regulations to enforce the Clean Air Act. But to circle it around to DEF, the product we're talking about today, critically for us, in 2008, the EPA issued regulations that mandated that all 3/4-ton truck and larger trucks have diesel particulate filters installed. Then, in 2009, the EPA further strengthened its requirements that medium and heavy-duty vehicles reduce emissions from their engines. The diesel exhaust fluid, or DEF as we're discussing today, was designed to specifically meet the demands that were made upon the trucking industry as a result of the EPA requirements.
You talk a lot about the Clean Air Act and the EPA, which are both American. Is DEF only being used in the USA?
No. DEF began its journey after the EPA regulations here in 2008. But more recently, in Asia and countries like China and India, they've also introduced measures to counter rising air pollution, and the introduction of those regulations, norms, and standards drives DEF demand across the globe today.
Well, speaking of market demand, what's it like for DEF today?
It's definitely a growing market. Both the United States and Canada, where we do most of our work in the DEF industry, have large numbers of on-the-road vehicles and also stringent emission norms. And the most recent data that's been published estimated that the DEF aftermarket is supposed to grow from $15 million in 2022 to $22 million by 2027.
That's a substantial growth here in the US. What about in the global market? Is that growing as well?
Absolutely. The global diesel exhaust fluid aftermarket is also forecast to grow from $34.4 billion in 2020 to $50 billion in 2027. Again, this is in response to governments globally improving their emission standards and requiring compliance.
Now that we know what DEF is and what the demand is, Talk to me about how it's dispensed.
Well, DEF in the market in which we work is dispensed in jugs by truck stops and gas stations, but there are also larger tanks that dispense DEF in larger configurations.
So how do trucks know that they need DEF?
The trucks have warning systems or digital readouts, and if a driver ignores the warning system for DEF, the truck ceases to work.
Wow, that's a great way to remind you that your gas tank is empty, so to speak. Barbara, tell me how you know so much about the DEF market.
Well, Contech has always responded to the needs of our customer base, and we found that as the DEF marketplace was created after the EPA implemented these regulations, there was really a need for dispensing systems for the DEF fluid that's going to be coming out of and has been coming out of truck stops and gas stations. So out of that, a new product, our DEF Spouts, was born. Now the spouts initially, the plastic tubes that are used to dispense DEF fluid from the smaller containers, came in what we call a standard configuration. But as the marketplace has grown, we're now doing vented spouts, we're doing spouts that collapse, we're packaging spouts in different ways that are more consumer friendly, and the number of jugs have changed, the size of jugs have changed, the color of the jugs have changed. So we've been working in this marketplace now for quite a period of time, and we try to keep up with what's going on. We go to the industry conferences, we keep up with developments, and we talk to our customers about what they need. They're usually out ahead of it because as their customers require things from them, they turn to us to fill the need. And that's the role we've been playing pretty much since this marketplace was created.
Wow, that's wonderful that your business is able to pivot and be flexible. That is an excellent quality. So let's talk about the future. What does the future for DEF look like?
I think that as the world requires more from its governments regarding clean air, there are going to be more and more requirements that diesel engines have to comply, and diesel exhaust fluid fits that niche perfectly. And there's no question that there's a large need for DEF. If you look at a typical light-duty truck consumes between 2 and 3 gallons of DEF per 800 miles. Now, you have to look at the diesel truck in question, how heavy the load is, and as well as a number of other factors to determine exactly how much DEF fluid is going to be consumed by the vehicle. And those things are variable. But the bottom line is, as long as we're using these vehicles, we're going to need this fluid, and there are more vehicles on the road and more demands for clean air. So I think the confluence of those two is going to provide a robust market in the future. And as I mentioned earlier, the Tier 4 trucks do not operate without DEF. So if there is not a robust DEF system in place in the vehicle won't run. And the DEF market, of course, has a lot of complications today. On the micro level, there were shortages of sensors during the COVID period that complicated the marketplace. And more recently, when Russia invaded the Ukraine and the world responded with sanctions, that has affected the DEF market because Russia, as it turns out, is a major producer of urea, one of the major components of DEF. So DEF is now in a shortage posture and diesel users are paying more. So the market is constantly emerging, but I think as long as these trucks are on the road, there is going to be a robust marketplace.
Wow, that's a lot of information and a lot of knowledge, and I'm sure that's part of the reason that your customers keep coming back. Thanks for sharing all your information. If folks want to reach out to you with more questions, how best can they reach you?
Please come and take a look at our website, con-techinternational.com. It gives all the information. We'd love to hear from you with a call, an email, or send us an RFQ and we'll see what we can do for you.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our podcast, Industrial Manufacturing Deep Dives. You can find out more information on our company, ConTech International, by visiting our website, contechinternational.com, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on all our social channels. If you'd like to be a guest or contribute to our podcast in any way, drop me an email at mclark@con-techinternational.com. Thanks again.